I was halfway through a work trip when my phone vibrated on the hotel desk. Motion detected. Living room. I opened my security camera expecting a glitch. Instead, I saw my parents inside my house, measuring walls, moving furniture, acting like owners. Then I heard my mother laugh and say, "Once everything is here, she won't make a scene." My stomach dropped. They weren't visiting. They were replacing my life while I was gone. I didn't scream. I didn't call anyone. I closed the app, smiled to myself, and made one decision that would change what they walked into next. And nobody expected the ending. My name is Amelia, and for most of my adult life, I've been the stable one in my family. I work in a professional field that pays well enough for me to live comfortably, travel for work, and own my own home in Seattle. I never depended on anyone else to build that life. I built it quietly, carefully, and mostly alone, in a family that made me convenient. My parents always said they were proud of me, but their attention was never really on me. It revolved around my younger brother. He was the dreamer, the risk-taker, the one who just needed a little more time, and somehow that time was always paid for by someone else, usually me. At first it felt harmless. A few payments here, helping cover some bills there. Emergency support that was always temporary, always just this once. I told myself it was family. I told myself being generous didn't make me weak. And every time I hesitated, my parents reminded me how lucky I was to be doing well. How much harder things were for him. So I didn't make a scene. I kept my head down and my boundaries soft. I answered calls late at night. I sent money without asking too many questions. I convinced myself that keeping the peace was the same thing as being loved. My house was the one thing that felt truly mine. I bought it on my own, in a quiet neighborhood, and turned it into a place where I could breathe. There was one room I was especially proud of, a space I had poured time and care into, something personal that grounded me after long weeks on the road. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't impressive to anyone else. But it was mine. That's why watching my parents walk through it like planners, not guests, felt unreal. Sitting there in that hotel room, replaying the footage over and over, pieces started clicking together. The casual confidence, the certainty in my mother's voice, the way they moved through my home without hesitation. This wasn't a misunderstanding. This wasn't a favor they forgot to ask for. This was a decision they made because, for years I had taught them I would accept it. I didn't turn the camera off. I sat on the edge of the hotel bed and let the footage play again, this time with the sound on. I needed to be sure. My parents were standing in my living room, talking to each other like I didn't exist. My father pointed toward the hallway, discussing what could be moved. My mother nodded, already rearranging my life in her head. Then she said it again. Once everything is here, she won't make a scene. She'll just accept it. She didn't sound angry. She didn't sound guilty. She sounded certain. That sentence landed heavier than anything else. Because in that moment, I realized this wasn't impulsive. It wasn't desperation. It was a pattern. They weren't worried about how I would feel. They were counting on how I always behaved. I thought back to all the times I didn't make a scene, when money I sent was spent on something else, when plans were made involving my time, my resources, my space, without anyone asking, when I was told, it's easier if you just go along with it. And I did. I had confused being calm with being respected. I had confused generosity with love. Sitting there alone, I finally understood the cost of that mistake. This wasn't about my brother needing help. This was about my parents believing my life was flexible property, that my success meant access, that my boundaries were suggestions, not rules. And what made it worse was how confident they were that I wouldn't fight back. Something shifted in my chest then. Not panic, not grief. Something colder, clearer. For the first time, I wasn't thinking about keeping the peace. I was thinking about taking my power back. I didn't call them. I didn't confront anyone. The old version of me would have rushed to explain, to argue, to beg them to slow down. But that version was gone. Confrontation wouldn't stop them. It would only teach them to hide it better. So I stayed quiet and started working. On the flight back, I bought Wi-Fi and opened my laptop. I created a single folder and gave it a simple name. Inside it, I pooled together records I hadn't looked at in years. Payments, bills, transfers. One payment looked harmless. So did the next. Together they told a different story. This wasn't generosity anymore. It was entitlement. I also knew something else. My brother never did anything quietly. If he was planning to move into my house, he'd want people to see it, to admire it, to believe he'd finally made it. So I let him have his moment. I didn't park in my driveway. Cars lined the street. Music thumped from inside. Strangers moved through my front door like it was a public space. My house, the one I built to be quiet, had become loud without my consent. Inside, everything was unrecognizable. Lights, a backdrop, people laughing and drinking like this was normal. My mother stood at the center of it all. She froze when she saw me. "What are you doing here?" She snapped. I came home, I said. To my house. She sighed. Don't make this about you. That sentence told me everything. My brother stood nearby, smiling into his phone, performing success. When he saw me, his smile flickered. She's cool with all this, he laughed to the camera. No, I said calmly. I'm not. The room shifted. I'm ending this. I placed the folder on the table. This is my home. I own it. No one asked for my permission. Then someone else walked in, holding an envelope. This belongs here, she said. Inside were papers. The vehicle wasn't his. The accounts weren't authorized. My name had been used without my consent. The room went silent. That's when everything collapsed. Not because I yelled, but because the truth had nowhere left to hide. Everyone who doesn't live here needs to leave, I said. This ends now. People left quietly. My parents stared at me like strangers. You raised me to keep the peace, I said. Today I chose myself. The house didn't feel empty afterward. It felt calm. For the first time, the silence felt like peace. Family isn't endurance. It isn't entitlement. It's respect. Walking away wasn't cruelty. It was survival. The house didn't feel empty after they left. That surprised me. I stood in the middle of the living room long after the last door closed, listening to the quiet settle into the walls. Not the tense quiet I'd grown up with. Not the kind that waits for the next argument or demand. This silence didn't feel like absence. It felt like ownership. For years, silence in my life had meant compliance. It meant swallowing words before they caused discomfort. It meant letting things slide. Because pushing back was labeled dramatic or ungrateful. But this silence was different. It didn't ask anything from me. It didn't pressure me to fix or soften or explain. It just existed. I turned off the lights one by one, walking through my home slowly, deliberately, as if I were meeting it again for the first time. The couch was slightly out of place. A lamp leaned at the wrong angle. The faint outline of where the backdrop had stood was still visible on the wall, like a ghost of something fake that had tried to pretend it belonged. I didn't rush to clean it all at once. That urge to immediately restore, to erase evidence, to make everything normal again was old programming. Instead, I let it stay messy for the night. I let the truth remain visible. I slept deeply. No dreams, no anxiety jolts, just rest. When morning came, it came quietly. Sunlight filtered through the windows in a way I hadn't noticed before, touching the floors softly without interruption. I made coffee and stood at the kitchen counter, not checking my phone, not bracing for reactions. Eventually the phone buzzed anyway. My mother's name. I watched it ring. In the past, I would have answered immediately, heart racing, already preparing explanations. This time, I let it go to voicemail. Then another call came from my father. Then a message. We need to talk. You went too far. Family matters shouldn't be handled like that. I didn't respond, not because I was angry, but because I finally understood something fundamental. Responding right away had never made things better. It had only taught them that pressure worked. Hours passed. The messages shifted tone. Concern replaced accusation, but the core stayed the same. Are you okay? We're worried about you. This isn't like you. They were right about one thing. It wasn't like the version of me they were used to. That version no longer existed. Later that afternoon, I went into the room I loved most, the one that had been nearly rearranged out of recognition. I straightened it slowly, not to make it perfect, but to make it mine again. Each object returned felt intentional, like reclaiming a piece of myself that had been treated as communal property for too long. As I worked, memories surfaced. Not dramatic ones, small ones. The first time I covered a bill without being asked how it affected me. The first time I was told, "You're strong, you can handle it." The first time I ignored the quiet. Resentment building in my chest because keeping the peace felt easier than naming discomfort. I realized something that day. No one had forced me into that role. I had stepped into it willingly, believing it was love. Understanding that didn't bring guilt. It brought clarity. That evening, my brother's social media went dark. No stories, no posts, no captions hinting at success or transformation. The silence around him was sudden, almost jarring. For someone who lived loudly, invisibility was its own kind of exposure. I didn't check on him. That was new too. A few days later, my parents asked to meet. In person. Neutral ground, they said. Somewhere public. They framed it as concern, as wanting to understand, as needing closure. I agreed, not because I owed them, but because I wanted to see if anything had changed. It hadn't. They arrived together, sitting across from me with expressions carefully arranged. My mother spoke first. She said she felt hurt. My father said he felt blindsided. They spoke about embarrassment, about how things looked, about how other people perceived what happened. I waited. When they finished, I asked a simple question. Do you understand why I did what I did? There was a pause. Then my mother sighed and said, We understand that you were overwhelmed. That was my answer. They didn't understand. Not really. They still believed this was about my reaction, not their actions. They still saw my boundaries as an emotional episode, not a line drawn after years of being crossed. I didn't argue. I didn't raise my voice. I said, I'm not willing to continue conversations that don't include accountability. My father frowned. So what, we're just supposed to apologize? No, I said calmly. You're supposed to acknowledge reality. They didn't. So I stood up, I paid for my coffee, and I left. Walking away used to feel like failure to me, like abandonment. That day it felt like alignment. Weeks passed. Life didn't explode. Nothing dramatic happened. No public apologies. No grand reconciliation. And strangely, the absence of chaos revealed something important. I had been the stabilizer. Without me absorbing impact, everything else wobbled. My brother struggled quietly. I heard fragments through extended family. Things weren't working out. Plans had fallen through. Support had dried up. For once, consequences were meeting behavior without me standing in between. My parents reached out less. When they did, it was cautious, measured, as if they were finally unsure which version of me they were speaking to. I didn't correct them. I let them learn. At home, something else changed. I stopped apologizing for taking up space. I stopped explaining my decisions. I stopped preemptively softening truth. Peace settled deeper, not as relief, but as permanence. One night, I sat in the living room with the lights off, thinking about how close I had come to losing everything that mattered, not because I wasn't strong enough, but because I had been too accommodating. That realization stayed with me. I used to believe family meant endurance, that love was measured by how much you were willing to absorb quietly. That strength meant never making a scene. I know better now. Strength is knowing when silence protects you and when it erases you. The day I walked into my own home and said no wasn't the end of my family story. It was the end of my silence.